Hi Aisha, welcome to Better. Before we start discussing today's topic, how about a quick introduction of yourself and what you do for our audience?
Sure. Thank you, Amna. My name's Aisha Memon, and I have been in the tech industry in the Silicon Valley for about 15 years now. And I kind of grew up in the Silicon Valley, went to school here. My career has primarily been uh, right in between business and IT, pretty much all the time. And my background is management information systems, so I kind of sit in that spot between the computer engineers, the techies, and the business world. A lot of times things, get lost in translation, and I think that's where I've added the most value. Um, a lot of my career was uh, gathering requirements from users and kind of working with SQL reporting and visualizations, kind of BI reports, and getting answers to pertinent questions for the users. However, since then, it's kind of evolved. I've spent a lot of time in project management, program management spectrum as well. And currently, I'm very focused on data governance. That's kind of become my thing right now because I think it's the prerequisite and the homework that we have to do now in order to advance into the field of AI, ML, and retrieve the benefits that we're needing and make it all ethical. Spending a lot of time in data, there's some truths I've learned about life as well. Data doesn't lie. So, at any point, there's a lot of human behaviors that also come up when we're dealing with data initiatives, trying to do some transformation. So it's very interesting that there's this human aspect and psychology aspect to how you drive change at any organization as well, which makes it very interesting.
Great, and I hope you can take some of that in for our discussion today, which is around why we need more empathy-based entrepreneurs. So let's get first thing first sorted. What is empathy for you? How would you define it?
Empathy, I think, is a pretty loaded term. In the industry, we've been hearing it a lot more lately. It's almost become a buzzword. And I want to, caution your listeners to say, like, please think about empathy. It's not just something that, it's not just being nice to everyone. That's not defining empathy. What empathy really means is that we need to kind of evolve our understanding of ourselves. So if we assess ourselves, we need to understand we all carry some kind of biases, based on our conditioning, based on how we've grown up. There's so many things that society instills in us. So we all carry our biases, and that's just based on our experience and our life. And empathy means to really recognize that, I myself carry some biases. So how do I step out of those biases and then relate to people? Because what tends to happen is we tend to stay within our communities. We tend to stay where things are comfortable. We tend to mingle with people in society that makes us feel good. But if we really activate our empathy muscle, I feel like we can draw better connections with people who may not necessarily look like us, who may not necessarily speak the same language, who may, so it has multiple benefits. And I feel like, we don't even understand the term. Pretty much, we just like to use it as, oh, it's just being nice to everyone, and that's the wrong term, because then it can get into some pretty dark stuff, because it can come back to bite you if you're not prepared.
Building up those connections, do you believe that empathy and being a good leader go hand in hand?
Oh, definitely. Most definitely. I feel like empathy-based leadership is what is needed right now in our society. I think even as a civilization, we go through phases, right? Just like any individual in life, we go through phases. So I think as a world, a whole world, where we're at right now, begs us to kind of consider uh, some alternate ways of leadership, right? There's empathy-based leadership, there's adaptive leadership styles that make it more resilient, right? For anybody who's in that organization or in that under that leadership command to activate their adaptability and resiliency. And humility-based leadership, which is the servant-based leadership, right? These are all, I think, encompassed within the empathy-based leadership. And definitely, I think the world at any level, be it a small business, be it an organization, be it even government and politics, I believe empathy-based leadership is what we're starting to see. That's adding more value and making, transforming lives in a meaningful way. So, my assessment is yes, we need more of this.
But at the end of the day, these things, empathy and emotional intelligence, they're difficult to measure, right? Because I think the definition of it also varies from person to person. So how then can we weigh its impact?
That's a good question. I think the academia and the world is still like trying to figure this piece out of how to actually measure. And it's not something like an aptitude test you go and give, because empathy, like I said, it's a muscle. The more you train it, the more it grows, right? So measuring it is very difficult, but I feel like certain personality assessments can be done to gauge, um, the sensitivity that people have in them. Do they even feel other people's pain? And I think those types of assessments can at least shortlist the people who have the caliber to become more empathy-based leaders. And those are the ones that can be maybe heavily invested on to kind of, make their track record towards leadership. The flip side to this is that a lot of times the more highly sensitive or the more empathic people who have a lot of intuition, they tend to be the ones that are more introverted, because throughout their lives they've always been conditioned to to just draw the pain from other people, and they've kind of conditioned themselves to quiet down and not necessarily speak up, which is a valuable attribute of being a leader. So I think there's only a subset of the highly sensitive folks who come out of this, like I said, the dark side of empathy. Once they come out of that, they're better suited to become leaders because they've learned the hard way. So I think there's more that can be done, from organizations' perspective, to invest in their employees to really know themselves, right? The more people know themselves, the better they can be at, um, uh, generating a quality empathy-based leadership.
So we agree that work is being done on this end to have more of a, deeper understanding of what empathy is and how to basically bring it in business. But do you think it's safe to say that there's still a need to bring about an empathy revolution in the business world? And if so, how can we go about it?
Yeah, I think time right now it's a testing time. They're trying times. And if you look at history at any point when we use the term revolution, it's because there is a defiance that is needed, right? There's some sort of rebellion that is required. Like, how much more can people take, right? So this is where I think in a lot of dimensions, our society is starting to sense that whatever had worked for us in the past has maybe gone overboard and is no longer working for us, right? There's some patterns that we can see that might have been beneficial for our society, say in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, maybe even the 80s. But then we see this sort of like a downturn. And even if you look just at the tech industry, like there's starting to be a lot of this assessment and awareness of what really is transpiring. Like, are we really being commoditized? Why is our data being sold? Things like that. So there's a lot of this, sense and feeling that maybe the way things have always worked is not the way we want it to continue. And I feel like the millennials, I would like to say that we should, they seem very promising in questioning these patterns. So I think we're heading towards a world where people are going to start questioning, and there may be, more of this type of revolution where we'll start to see these patterns being dismantled. Will there be tantrums when they're dismantled? Yes, because anything that's going to go down is going to try to take everything down with them. But I think we're going to evolve through this. It's going to be a trying, test, I think, and time will tell on what will prevail.
Right, I agree. And now let's take a look at the overall business landscape. Is empathy something that's more evident in the startup culture as opposed to in enterprises in Fortune 500 or even Fortune 100?
You know, in recent times, I've kind of gotten myself more involved in the day-to-days of working with entrepreneurs and kind of advising them in their startups. And my assessment right now is that I see more empathy-based leadership in the startup community. And again, it kind of goes back to this, what I just mentioned earlier is, I see a lot of promise in the millennials and the millennial generation who is going to not take everything just as is and is going to question. And the way they're solving a lot of these problems is from a very, very like human perspective, from an empathy-based approach. You look at design thinking, the whole requirements gathering part is all being empathy based, right? So you see a lot of these constructs that the startups are very keen on. They are born that way, and I think they're born in an empathy-based environment. Whereas a lot of these organizations that you see around that have been around for a while, they're having to transform themselves. They've never operated from an empathy-based approach, but now they're starting to realize that they need to in order to survive and thrive.
That transition is
Yes.
making them slow.
No, it's very difficult. And I feel like even as an individual, if you even as a parent, right? The more like raising a child a certain way with a certain belief system, it's like a plain white canvas, right? You instill in them the values that you want to raise them with, and they will shine. But if you already have an individual who is an adult, and then you try to instill values in them and have them change their belief system, it's very difficult. And not everybody is able to do it. I'm not saying it's impossible. I think it is possible for even organizations that have operated, for eternity, for them to transform. But it's more of a something that requires more muscle to do. Not
Well,
everybody. It's not easy for everybody to transform.
and especially in the tech industry, which is notorious for lacking that human factor, what's your take on empathy based leadership specifically in the tech sector? How much progress have you made with it?
I think there's a lot of awareness coming. I think there's a lot of humbleness that's starting to be, it's starting to appear more in the tech industry, whereas maybe a decade ago, there was a lot of arrogance. Now we're starting to see a lot of this humble attitude, that maybe we do not know everything, or maybe what we tried was not the best way. So I think there's a natural progression even in the tech industry towards assessing and evaluating the company's beliefs. And we're starting to see like even companies like leader companies in the valley also standing up and saying, part of our core belief system is we have empathy as part of our core belief system. Even Cisco, for example, has gone out and said, like, as our part of our mission statement, based on all of this change that transpired based on pandemic and everything that happened in the recent year, Cisco standing up to say, yes, we are an empathy-based company and it's part of our core belief system. So I'm starting to see a lot of awareness in the industry on this. And I think they're starting to see that without this piece, it will be very hard to succeed. So we have to be getting better at serving our customers, at serving our ecosystem, whoever, serving our employees. And that's the only way to succeed. And if you're in any kind of service business, obviously you have to be empathic. So.
And just building upon that. So, Aisha, what do you think are the three key ways that you would, say that these three ways are how empathy boosts a company's strategic direction?
I think there's multiple ways, but for me, like we talked about transformation. If there's any like tech company out there, they're hinged on how fast the digital transformation, for example, is going to transpire in this world, right? So if you're in the business of transformation, which requires change, which requires resilience, it requires adaptability. I mean, this is where empathy is really going to help. If you don't have empathy and you're trying to change the world, it's not going to happen, right? That's one of the ingredients that has been discovered that we need. Part of the other piece, which also briefly touched upon, is the inner transformation as an organization itself. You can't really change anybody or the world if you can't change yourself, right? And this is where even as a journey, enterprises and companies and organizations have to work on inner transformation. They have to make their employees feel safe. They have to make their employees feel like they're heard. They even have to make their customers feel heard and acknowledged, right? So this is where I feel a lot of strategically, like a lot of ways that empathy can really build trust and boost revenue. Like this is I think how business is done. And one of the last pieces, like the third point I want to make on empathy and how it relates to strategy is, if you want to foster innovation and creativity, then you need a culture that has empathy based values. You can't expect people to be innovative if there's toxicity in the culture, right? So in order to produce a safe environment for people to really boom towards innovation and creativity, you want them to come up with out of box ideas, you want them to speak up, then you need to, this whole culture of empathy needs to be enabled within the organization. And I think that's some of the top ways that strategically it can really help enterprises.
One piece of advice that you've been given that you'd like to share with those listening to this podcast.
Sure. I'd like to say invest in yourself. The more you know yourself, I think the better service you can provide as an employee, as a CEO, as an owner, as any individual. So the piece of advice I had gotten that really sticks to my mind, and it was a very dear colleague of mine who had shared this with me before we parted our ways, was what has gotten you here in life, it's not what's going to take you forward. So if you want to keep going ahead, if you want to keep moving in life, then you really need to assess your skill set, at given points of time, and then identify what else is needed. What do you need? What are the gaps? And somewhat trust your intuition too, and work on those. If we all display ourselves as work in progress, we're all working on a growth mindset, then that really takes the pressure off of having to know everything. And you can really start taking risks and going into places and advancing your career in ways that you never imagined before. So that's my piece of advice.
That's a really great piece of advice, actually.
Thank you.
So, where do you see this need for empathetic entrepreneurs facilitating the convergence of emerging tech going forward?
Oh, I see it in a lot of different areas. To be honest, what I'm starting to see, especially with some of this advisor work with startups, I see it a lot from a global perspective, I'm seeing it a lot in the agricultural industry. There's a lot of technical advancements, augmented use of technology. Environmentally as well, healthcare as well. There's just so many industries. I think there's so many dire human problems, especially with the pandemic. You see all these problems just surfaced to the world, right? Like even education, online education, like these are all, I think, pieces of the puzzle that need to get solved. And right now is a great time for entrepreneurs to go off and try to, from a human perspective, we're all in this together. Nobody has figured it out yet. This is the new world. It's here to stay. Like, what is it? What are the things that we are taking inventory on? What are the things where we can really partner with technology to make it better for everyone, right? This is where I feel like if we look at ourselves right now as humans, like we can't even work or partner with other humans. But if you look at the future, we got to be able to partner with technology. And how are we going to enable that? How are we even going to make sure that solutions that are being put out there are based on empathy-based values? Like we're not going to, this is where it gets really like, if you watch any of these sci-fi movies, Skynet happening and all that, technology taking over, it's going to be narcissist. Like this is where it's really getting close to that time. And I think building the right values and how these solutions are going to get operated, and building good governance around it to ensure that it's going to stay ethical, I think is the piece of the puzzle we need to solve. And there's a lot of opportunity in every which way you look to solve these problems right now for people. The world is we're in a challenging time, and I think a lot of good is going to come out of this hardship that we're going through.
Right. Thanks, Aisha. That's all from my end. Thanks again for joining us on Better Tech today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I enjoyed our discussion. Appreciate it.